So hi, everyone. And as she said, aligning generic services maturity with practical patterns. So what I hope to achieve in this talk is, first of all, like the name is very long and very bombastic, and there's like a lot of going into it. So what I'm hoping is for two things. One thing is to sort of take practical ideas from the platform/generic subdomains world and make it practical and connect it a little bit with DDD. So we want to have all of that very practical, very much related to the real world. So this is what I hope to achieve. How am I going to do that? I'm going to be talking about the generic subdomains reality, first of all, because it's not all it's cranked up to be. Afterwards, I'll jump to talking about bounded context relationships and maturity, and then we'll switch it off to the main part of the presentation, which is the practical patterns themselves. A little bit about me. So I'm a staff engineer at a company called Forder in the fintech world. I'm an experienced technical leader with over 10 years of experience. I mainly work in companies which are very like product-led companies. I do public speaking, hence I'm here. I write content, I have a blog post, and I'm a DDD enthusiast. So this is me. The reason I'm talking specifically about this topic is because at the previous company that I worked at, I was a software architect, and in some point in time, I moved and I started being the architect of the platform group. Right, and things go a little bit differently in platform groups. And we had a team that was devoted to everything generic, right? All the off-the-shelf tools, everything, all the research that was needed to be done. So we had a team just for that. And I started to do some research to think about guidelines, leading questions, and things that can help us to actually get us to be more formalized in this area. In our mindset and our thinking. So this is the byproduct of the research that I've done as part of being the software architect at that group, and also different things that I learned along my career. Okay. So I'll start with the generic subdomains reality. So I'm sure this is not new to all of you, just to to map it out. So we have core subdomains, right? This is our secret sauce in our companies. We have supporting subdomains, which are areas in the company that we can take off-the-shelf tools, but it's still very important for us to actually, for the core subdomains to succeed. And generic subdomains, usually problems that were already solved multiple times by different companies. And we have even companies that excel at this. This is the product that they sell. This is the tools that they give, right? And we'll be focusing about this area. So I referred to the fact that when I did this research, I was working at a different company, not Forder, where I work today. I worked at a company called Augury, and their main product was predictive maintenance. Okay, it was predicting malfunctions on machines in manufacturing plants. So this is an example. It's not the whole picture of the company, but just sort of for us to have like an anchor for an example that will follow us throughout the presentation, right? So, for example, a core domain would be predicting malfunctions. A supporting domain could be reflecting customer structure, like imagining our customers were very big enterprise companies that really had a lot of unique needs around modeling their structure. Like they had a manufacturing plant in that country, and this user is related to this one, and this machine. It becomes complicated, but it's still very unique to our domain. And lastly, we have, for example, managing customer notifications, right? SMS, emails, very much common. We have it in almost every system, right? So if this is our world, what's the first thing? The first thing is that we ask ourselves is, should we build or buy, right? As engineers, we love to buy. to build, sorry. We love to build. I'm getting ahead of myself. You should buy. No, but we love to build. We love to build, right? We love to build it like as abstract, as generic, as complex, as beautiful as we can, right? But the thing is that there are pros and cons to both approaches, right? So we have build and buy. And for build, for example, we have a lot of freedom, right? We can choose to solve which use cases that we want and requirements, and we don't need to look for a tool that fits the right needs and does all of that, right? The cons for this approach is the maintenance, the never-ending maintenance, right? The more code you write, the more code you maintain over time, right? The development time and also the time to value. Sometimes if you have complex things to solve in the generic subdomains world, it will take you a lot of time to develop it when you can just have off-the-shelf tool. If you want to buy, so buy. So the thing is you don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? You can take something, and like a lot of smart people already sat down and thought about this problem, and you can just use it. There's less maintenance because there's less code. It doesn't mean there's no maintenance, and we'll get to that. And you can focus on your core subdomains, right? And this is what we actually want to do. We want to focus on the moneymaker, right? But there's still limitations to this side as well. There's a cost to the decision, right? We need to go and check a lot of different tools, and we need to get a budget, and we need to do validation, and we need to talk to security, and we need to do a lot of things, right? But as I see it, the pros for the buy approach outweighs the build, because over time, when you're maintaining these things over time, this is my focus point, right? And for me, this really shines and says that I hope we agree we should buy, right? Because buying the tools will help you actually focus our efforts on where we need to business-wise. So assume we're buying, assume we agree, right? So we have different ways to actually embed tools into our system, right? And I'm going to be talking about 3 patterns in which we can use to wrap tools into our system. First of all, we can just take a service. You can call it a microservice, a service, call it whatever you want, but you just take the off-the-shelf tool, its API, and wrap it in a service. This has its pros and cons as well, right? You have everything in one place. You're not technically decoupled, like assuming you have a package or a module or something else, and then you need to have it in different areas in the company, right? And maybe they have different tech stacks. So it's simple to maintain, to deploy. You choose the tech stack. It's all in one space. The con, it's possibly over network, right? Sometimes we want login, authentication, different types of tools that require us to actually have like latency considerations. So it's not always the right fit, but it certainly is the simplest one. Afterwards, we have a module. As I said, I touched on that. So it's fast because it's running in the same process. It's using the same code, the same tech stack, but we are coupled, right? We need to start maintaining things. And as the company grows, or if you're working in a big company, the more consumers that you have, like as a platform team or a platform group, then it means you have more maintenance to do. If you want to upgrade a package, suddenly you need to go and maybe ask teams to upgrade it for you, upgrade the packages for you, so it becomes sort of like a maintenance hell. And lastly, we have a sidecar. If you don't know it, so a sidecar is, simply speaking, putting like another process in the same pod, right? And then the communication is a lot closer in between the 2 deployments, but you can still deploy independently. So I just said I think the pros for this situation, right? But the con for this one is the complexity. This is not a choice that you just make, you just say, oh, I want to deploy something, I want to have a different tech stack, let's just use a sidecar architecture and infrastructure-wise. It's a lot more complex. You need to have expertise, you need to know what you're doing, it's more complex on the DevOps side. So it has its cons, right? And in the rest of the talk, I'm going to focus on the service pattern, but I will be introducing leading questions that can help you actually, even if you need to choose any I'm excited. Any other types of these patterns, if you want to use them, then you can use the same leading questions, and it sort of gives you like a mindset and an approach. So it's not necessarily just for this, but this is a very good example. So I'll be focusing on a wrapper service. Awesome. So I've touched a little bit on the fact that we can either build or buy when we are in generic subdomains, and the fact that if we choose to buy, we can embed this in different ways into our systems, right? We have different patterns. What's the reality to all of this? Because we think, oh, we're buying a tool off the shelf, lovely. I don't need to manage everything. I'll connect to this API and it will work. Well, no. No tool is perfect. Usually when you go and you start doing, you're starting to do the research on the tools that you might want to use, you find out that they might be lacking, or they might not be specific for your requirements. And then what happens is that you create another layer of business logic above it, right? This is why you need these wrappers, and you can't just use them, because a lot of the times you want to either translate like the tool's language to your own language, or you want to introduce a new layer of business logic. So this is the reality, right? And then you need to maintain it and to support it, right? This is like the hidden costs of off-the-shelf tools that we often don't take into consideration. And as I said, for me, the biggest con of building is the long-term maintenance. And we need to acknowledge that this is here. So, awesome. So I've talked about build versus buy. I'll drink some water. I have a reminder to drink water in my notes, because I talk quickly, and I need to remember to slow down. It's all good. We're all relaxed here together. So I talked about the build versus buy, and I talked about the reality and the patterns that we can use. We're going to focus on the wrapper service, right? So let's jump into bounded context, relationships, and maturity. First of all, context maps. Okay, so this is where we're starting to enter the DDD world, right? So context map is, we can say, a tool from the tactical DDD world, and basically it helps us describe different relationship patterns between bounded contexts, right? So we can actually use this and start acknowledging the way that our generic subdomains or bounded contexts are interacting with core or supporting domains. There are 9 patterns, and I won't go into all of them deeply. We'll see which ones fits for us, and then we'll do a deeper dive into them. So we have the 9 patterns. Now we need to identify which one fits our situation, right? Generic subdomains. So first of all, the first relationship type, like the relationship types are like buckets that you can like sort of put each relationship in them. We have mutually dependent. So mutually dependent is a case that we have 2 bounded contexts that need to interact together to actually reach a business goal, right? They're really highly coupled. Afterwards, we have free. Free means 2 bounded contexts that don't interact at all. Maybe they're in 2 completely core subdomains, and they bring different values, so it's unrelated. And lastly, we have upstream, downstream, right? And this sort of starts to smell like what we're looking for, right? Because we have a service that we want to give a lot of consumers from different parts of the company, right? So it's sort of similar. Let's see how it falls. So these are our buckets, and let's start mapping the context map patterns. So we have the mutually dependent ones, which are, as I said, less interesting for us. We have the upstream, downstream, Customer-supplier, Conformist, open host service, and anti-corruption layer. We'll touch on them a lot more very soon. Free, the one is called separate ways. And I took the liberty of adding another bucket, which is called avoid. Big ball of mud. So yeah. Don't do this one, at least try not to, sometimes we can't avoid it. So I think it sort of becomes clear, right? When we're talking about generic subdomains and bounded contexts, so we have a service that we want to provide to different places in the company. So they are consuming services from us. So we are using the upstream, downstream pattern, and these are our patterns. Okay, so we have that. Awesome. How does it, start to build up into something practical we can use in every day? So I saw the patterns, and I told myself we need leading questions to understand where we're standing at today, because the company existed for 10 years or so when I started to do this research, and obviously we already have infrastructure in place. So I needed to start identifying what sorts of patterns I have in my system. So I built some leading questions. The first set of leading questions is around interface ownership and mapping. Okay, how does it come together? We'll see very soon. The three leading questions are, who dictates the interface? Will the consumer align? And who is the mapping owner? Let's see it happen in reality. So we have customer-supplier, a first pattern. So the customer-supplier pattern is sort of like a loosey-goosey sort of pattern. We don't know who's defining the interfaces. The most important thing is that you communicate, but it's not very strict. And if anyone would have produced a mapping layer, it would have been the generic bounded context. And in my eyes, the way it connects is that if we want our customers to be using our generic service without needing to align to us, right? So who dictates the interface? Either one. Will the consumer align? Not necessarily. And who is the mapping owner? Well, it will be the generic bounded context if it exists. It doesn't have to be, but it can. The next pattern would be a conformist, right? I think that usually when we build software, this is what we imagine, right? I'm defining my interface. Someone will use my interface to consume my service from me, right? So who dictates the interface? In this case, the generic bounded context. Will the consumer align? Yes, and who is the mapping owner? Not required. The open host service is very similar to the conformist pattern. The only thing is that it has a level up in regards to the abstraction that it allows you to build, right? So in general, what will happen in the open host service is that you will build a protocol that will help you adjust to complex abstract integrations into your bounded context. And we'll see an example real soon, how it can come to life, right? But just imagine you have a big, let's say, in your bounded context, you have a large set of microservices. Then you want to give a very abstract, simple API for your consumers to use. So generating this API, this abstraction, is creating a open host service. And lastly, we have the anti-corruption layer. So if it sort of felt like we're progressing over time, right? We had the customer-supplier, loosey-goosey, then the conformist with strict, and then the open host service were complex and still strict. Now we have the anti-corruption layer, right? And in the anti-corruption layer, we will want to use it when we actually have our consumers, the core or supporting bounded contexts, in a situation that they don't want to align to our APIs, right? So they will generate a mapping layer to help them actually continue and use in our system, right? Maybe they don't want to write code in their system. Maybe it's legacy. Maybe it's in maintenance mode. Maybe they can't spare the people to write it. I don't know. It can be a million reasons. But this is generating the anti-corruption layer. Who dictates the interface? The generic. It's still a conforming API. Will the consumer align? No, because they're creating a new layer in between. And if they create this layer, it's in the ownership of the core and supporting. This is just a summary slide, all of the leading questions together. And this can really, and once I had this in place, I can really start looking at the architecture we already had in place and the infrastructure and start mapping where we stand today with every type of tool that we had. Awesome. So this was for me to identify where I stand today, But now I want to start being intentional, right? I want to look at my system and I want to build it to the future. And what happens if I want to build something new in my system? So what I'm going to do with that? So for that, I did my research and figured out that it relates a lot to maturity and the maturity of the bounded context that I'm using. And I found that there are three main types of maturity. One is product-wise. The second one is the number of consumers. Still, we're in a platformic area, right? So we have a lot of consumers, and it impacts our decision. And the complexity of the bounded context, or the domain internally itself. Okay? So these are the three types. Let's see how we can use them. The first maturity type is product. And when I say level of service, I mean, imagine, like when you have a tool that you give, it can have either just an API, a method, an admin tool, an asynchronous API, GraphQL, gRPC, imagine what you want, right? So it's all about how easy it is to integrate with your system. And basically, you have two criteria that can lead afterwards to your questions. One is the maturity itself, like product-wise. Imagine yourself. Let's say you're an architect and you don't even have product managers in your team, but you look at your domain and you're saying, do I know what's going to be here in 1 year or 2 years, right? So you can tell how mature it is and how mature it is compared to where it should be, right? Secondly, and this is a very strong tell as well, is how prone to change is the interface, right? When you implemented something and you know that you're going to have a lot more work done to it, let's say in the next 6 months, 1 year, it means that it's very prone to change, and meaning probably the maturity is not as high, right? Things with high maturity tend to change less. So tells for us could be a clear vision and how extensive of use, the extensive usage, never mind, how much the product is used. So these are things that can really help us sort of direct us in the right direction. The second maturity type is the number of consumers. So this is, as it sounds, the number of active consumers that are actually using my system. And this starts to impact how much I need to actually manage my backward compatibility and the cross-team alignment, right? Because once you have more people integrated, you need to align with everyone and ask everyone's opinions about requirements and changes and when can you prioritize it and stuff like that. So the strongest tell here is how hard it is to make a change. If it's hard, it means that you've reached a certain level of maturity there. And lastly, the complexity itself. And I sort of touched on it with the open host service, but if it's hard to build good tools that are easy to integrate with, your complexity must be high, or you're making it too complex on your own. But it could be that your domain is really complex, right? So the tells can be the ease of use and how easy it is to engage with your subdomain and stuff like that. So these are the maturity types. And as I said, I'm mapping leading questions, right? Because I want this to be a tool that we can use in everyday life and actually give this to the team who owns the generic subdomains, and they can move on their own. You know, they don't need to be dependent on me and how well I understand the maturity. So these are the questions. How mature is the bounded context? How prone to change is the interface? Do we need to maintain backwards compatibility? How complex? And how much cross-team alignment do we have? And these three questions, and you'll see soon because we're entering the practical patterns world, will really help guide us to understand which pattern we want to be intentional about and choose. Okay. So, quick recap. You remember, I talked about the reality, right? We have to manage our code somewhere. And this is why I'm doing this presentation and taking it so seriously, because we can't just have 2 people being responsible for integrations. They'll lose it. We need to take it seriously. I've built a list of leading questions to help us either identify where we're standing at today or how to be intentional for the future. And let's see it happening. So remember, we have our subdomains. We have the core, supporting, and generic one. Let's do a deeper dive into the generic. So assuming in the subdomain we have a bounded context, it's called notification management. OK, so our example is going to be around email capabilities. Okay, so when I did the research at Augury, we actually had like a service already set in place to send emails, but I want to sort of lead you through the story of transformation that happened for the service and also future plans that we have built using this line of thought, right? So the first set of existing requirements that were already in place were simple things, being able to define who receives the email, to set the email timing. You have two types of emails, right? You have emails that are sent after like a call to action happened or something happened in your system, you send the email, or you can have weekly emails, daily emails, monthly, whatever you need them, and also you need to be able to choose the email template. This is simplified, but it sort of gives the idea. The future, like we wanted to actually take this domain and build it to the future, right? The product, like the core product, was getting a lot more mature. And suddenly they started to want different requirements like we want personalization per user, or we want to be able to view the notification history in our system, or we want to have our own admin tool to manage all the emails and configurations. At that time, you needed developers to help set it up. Right? And all of these requirements sort of led us to the notion that we need to start thinking about the transformation of this subdomain, right, in this bounded context. So this is sort of how it looked. We had a notification service, which was calling SendGrid, which is a very common email service. And there was a user configuration service to configure different configurations. This is what's happening in the bounded context. And just so you know, like these colors are going to follow us through. When we're seeing yellow, we're thinking generic bounded contexts. And when we're seeing purple, we're thinking core or supporting domains. Right, so we have different services. One of them is the detection service, meaning detections from an AI engine, right? And once you get a detection that your machine has malfunctioned, the AI engine identifies that the machine has malfunctioned, so an email is automatically sent to someone in the manufacturing plant, right? Very simple. This is the situation here. Awesome. So let's see everything come together. So pattern number one is the customer-supplier, right? And let's imagine, for the example purposes, we have one service, just one service sending one ask for an email. So it means one team, one template. Everything is very simplified. So if you were using the customer-supplier, because it's the simplest one, it sort of leads us there, right? So theoretically, it should be our first pick. Let's see the leading questions, right? So how mature is the bounded context? One template, one user, one email, that's low. Even though I might have plans for 5 years ahead, the maturity is not high. How prone to change is the interface? Very much. I don't know. I've talked only to one customer. You know, who knows what will come in the future? Do I need to maintain backwards compatibility? Not necessarily. And to be honest, like I assume most of us are from engineering, you can go and just help the team change it, you know, and update it on your own. So we can just make it happen. How complex is the bounded context? Who knows? Maybe it will stay simple. Maybe it will get to be very complex. And how much cross-team alignment is needed is very low, one team. So do we really need to go the extra step in defining a conforming API? Not necessarily at this moment. How would it look? We have the core supporting service sending a domain event to the generic service. The generic service will map it to their internal logic and send it outside. In a real world, in Augury, so the detection service sent a domain event called detection created. The notification service consumed it, mapped it to the mapped it to the language of the email wrapper, and then the email wrapper could have built the template itself and sent it to SendGrid. The detection service didn't need, our consumers didn't need to do anything, you know? This is like magic for them. And when you're starting to think of how to be a step ahead of your consumers, talking for platform teams, right? Because platform teams are usually a few months behind you, right? If you're working in a core domain, because they're trying to align to a lot of requirements. So this gives value very, very quickly. Okay, so great success. This email people were off the roof, with this one email. And now we have 10 emails and 5 consumers. 5 teams. So we're starting to see that things are becoming repetitive, and also the need for us to be more precise with what we're giving to our customers, right? And this is the time to start setting our conforming API. So it's the next step. How do you know when? I'm assuming the tell should be when you're feeling that things are being very repetitive and you find yourself doing copy-paste for everyone, so you can start and make it a bit more generic. And our leading questions should really help guide us there, right? So what is the maturity? It's better. It's good now. It's repetitive. How much is the interface prone to change? Mid. We're not changing it as much. Things are still happening. We're finding out things. Okay. Do we need to maintain backwards compatibility? Now, yes. 5 consumers, it's too much to do trouble in our system. How complex is the bounded context? It's still very simple. The first customers that we opened this capability for were pretty everyday mundane users. So it was simple. And the cross-team alignment now is high, right? Because 5 teams, I don't know if you ever needed to align with 5 teams. That's a lot. So this is that. And these are the things that can help us understand if we want to move to being in the conforming pattern. How would it look? We have our core supporting service, and we send something that we defined it as a service request, meaning it's a request to request a service, right? And it can be either by an API or a queue, meaning a message bus, or you can choose whatever communication way you want. The idea is to ask for the service. Okay, so why go through the trouble of starting with a customer supplier? And then you need to transition, right? So as I said, I really believe in bringing value quickly, right? And this is something that can help you move quickly, this customer supplier pattern. But once we have done this, we are suddenly stuck in a situation in which we need to migrate to a conforming API. So this is how it can look like, right? So we have the service, it's still the same, but we can take the mapping layer and take it out of the generic service and put it outside. It can even be like an independent deployment, right? But the thing is now is that you're not coupling the generic service. You're still not asking your customers to migrate, but you are able to take it out of your system and encapsulate what you want in the generic subdomain, right? For example, we have created a layer that is called email mapping. This email mapping did consume the detection created, and then it generated a different event called notify email, right? And it did all the transformation in between the layers, and the notification service is now clean of business logic and business understandings. And the next service that will come in play, right? Let's say we have a machine service because our product is all about machines in manufacturing plants. Now they can directly send the notify email event. And we will stop handling new domain events in our system. So I hope you see it's starting to level up, right? So now the open host service. And as I said, this one is about abstracting complexity. So now we have 50 emails with 10 teams and services. Things are getting crazy. And that's good, because we're giving services to a lot of the teams in the company, meaning we are bringing a lot of value. But the thing is that we have started to notice that even though we have a conforming API, we have specific customers' requirements creeping in a non-generic way, right? So like this customer needs like a specific flag, right, just for them. And this is the point in time that we can start asking ourselves, okay, do we need to create an abstraction layer? Is this getting too complicated? And we need to take it to the next level. And this is the point in time that we ask ourselves about the open host service. So the open host service differs from the conforming API basically by defining a DSL, right? And the DSL helps us, it will help us provide this like transformation engine, right? And it will help us create this abstraction layer. The problem with building DSLs is that they're hard to build, or at least like good ones, that are easy to maintain and easy to give to customers. And for them, like when it comes to DevX, like imagine you have a lot of different teams that are using your API and you want them to have an easy way to just send an email, and suddenly it becomes like very complex and they need to read the documentation and stuff like that. You shouldn't make this decision lightly, but if it's needed, do it, right? So also here we have our leading questions. And the maturity would be very, very high, right? There's a lot of things that are repeatable, but some things that are creeping in. It won't be prone to change. The backwards compatibility will be like a hell yes. Like if you break something, you broke the entire company. And the complexity of the bounded context itself is getting a bit higher, right? And obviously the cross-team alignment, I said like 50 emails, 10 teams, that's craziness. So how would it look? Basically the same. We would just need to introduce a DSL layer and just have our mapping layer use this DSL layer, or have even the machine service use it. And in regards to the migration, the concepts are pretty similar. The notification service can expose a new API that uses the DSL, and all the customers that have requirements that can't be answered by the simple APIs can migrate, and the old ones can stay there. Now, again, this is all about building blocks and creating value for our customers and not making them migrate when they don't need to, because all of this is dev time and giving good service and good support. Okay. So, the customer-supplier, conformist, and open host service really look like building blocks and like a transformation story for each other, right? And now I want to talk about the anti-corruption layer, right? So the anti-corruption layer, we can view these like from two perspectives, I guess. One, I can say it's like it's not a step in the evolution, right? It's a case that if someone doesn't want to participate in the evolution, then they go on the side and they build themselves an anti-corruption layer, meaning like this mapping layer, right? But on the other hand, you can say that like my core supporting bounded context, the maturity is so high, I don't want to touch it. It's in maintenance mode. So we can come to this like from both perspectives, either saying it's legacy system nobody wants to change, or it's something that works really well, so I don't want to change it. Either way, the result is similar, right? We still need, if this bounded context will want to send an email, they will still need to find a way to use our conforming APIs, whether it's an open host or conforming. So they will generate this mapping layer. Okay, so in regarding to the identifications, the questions don't really fit here. I think that the criteria that helps us understand this best is the questions about like cost of change. Like if we find ourselves not wanting to change something, or saying that the amount of time that we need to do it, it's not worth it for a simple email, these is our tells for these situations, right? And how it can look, well, you can see nothing changed. My diagram is exactly the same. I changed the colors, right? So we can take the email mapping deployment and tell our customers, listen, we have given you this 2 years ago, and you still haven't migrated to the conforming API. This is yours now. Have fun. And that's it, right? And this is an anti-corruption layer between our notification service and the detection service, right? And they can take it and they own it. This is the whole difference. Additionally, you can see the email wrapper, right? So the email wrapper is actually helping, is an anti-corruption layer above SendGrid, right? Because SendGrid has its own language. They have email templates the SendGrid way. And let's say maybe tomorrow we want to move to a different email provider. So we want this encapsulation, right? When we're thinking encapsulation, it makes sense. But in reality, it's an anti-corruption layer, right? We encapsulate the language, but also the mapping itself, right? So this is another anti-corruption layer in our system. OK. I'm pretty much done, yeah? It came faster than I expected, and I hope I didn't speak too fast. As I said before, I think we should really start transforming ourselves into the buy first mindset. The generic subdomains world has evolved so much in, I don't know, the 10, 20 years that we have now. We have so many companies that gives us as a service authentication, emails, SMSs, and a lot of other tools, right? So we should take this into account, but we should take it seriously, right? Taking an off-the-shelf tool doesn't mean we don't need developers on the project. The other way around. We'll need, maybe we'll need just half a developer, half their time, right? But we still need to invest in this layer of wrapping these tools and also the business logic that we will create above it. We can still take ideas from the DDD world and make it very practical, right? I know that a lot of the time when people hear and talk about DDD, it's like a lot of hand waving, right? It's very abstract, very, I don't know, in the air. And I want to make DDD something that every person in my company can take and use and embed in their designs. Like, I want every developer to be able to talk in this language. And lastly, I highly recommend start thinking about like evolutionary architecture and how we can take maybe practices from realms that are a bit more like core or supporting and that we want to bring value faster for customers and start putting this in our platform teams. And why? Because we want to bring value fast as well, right? And we don't want to sort of miss the train. I've seen it happen more than once, cases that a team came to the platform team, asked for something, and we told them, yeah, sure, we'll go collect requirements, we'll be ready in 4 months. And they're like, no, I need this out in 3 weeks. And then they go and they build it on their own, and then you have a whole company with like infrastructure all around, right? So we want to avoid that. And if it means we need to be more agile as people working in the infrastructure world, then so be it. And that's it. Thank you. This is a QR to my LinkedIn. If you want to connect, this is my main platform. And that's it. Thank you.